I just had a failed attempt. Hasn't happened very often, and apparently the wireless wasn't strong enough. I don't know how that can be, but today is Sunday, and it is the 13th of August, and I am reading Out of Time, Out of Mind. It is the autobiography of Joan Grant. I have read up to part 5, where I am now, and we are in chapter 7 of part 5 of this autobiography of a very famous, magnificent woman who wrote amazing books about her far memories. Chapter 7, Sunset. When we got back to Hurtwood, the nurse met me in the hall. "My patient is asleep," she said, "and the elder Miss Sartorius has gone to bed. But I waited up because I wanted to tell you the news." "What news? What happened?" The surgeon brought a consultant here today. They have decided to move her to a nursing home in London for another course of deep x-rays as a last resort. "Can it do any good?" "It is not a nurse's business to criticize doctors, but I see her every day and I know how fast the cancer is spreading. She's happy here in her own room with her own things around her. I think it is cruel to move her." "Then she must not be moved. I will go to Harley Street first thing tomorrow morning and bully the idiotic doctors." The nurse sighed. "If only you had been here today, you might have been able to do something, but I'm afraid nothing can stop her being moved now. Her sister has convinced herself that the treatment will be successful. She was pathetically optimistic this evening." "It is Daisy who matters, not Elfie," I said hotly. But Daisy did not agree with me. When I tried to persuade her not to allow herself to be moved, she said, "I should, of course, prefer to stay here. But if I refuse to have this treatment, which I know as well as you and nurse do, it is quite futile. It would be extremely selfish." From the moment Bunny went to France, I lived in an agony of anticipation. The anticipation was almost worse than reading the telegram from the War Office. The least I can do for Elfie is to curtail, by keeping her childlike optimism alive, the period during which she has to face up to the fact that I am dying. She smiled and gave me one of her rare kisses. "What a comfort it is to me, my dear child, to know that you do not grudge me my freedom. I do not even have to worry about Elfie, for you will take care of her until she has become resigned to my absence." Was it to remind me that I must be loving enough not to try to cling to her physical presence, or because it really helped her to be reminded of another crossing of the river that made her ask me to read aloud to her the death of Sikita's mother? When my mother died, I prayed to the gods that I might not shadow her noonday with my sorrow. She left earth smoothly and quietly as a sailing boat drifts downstream on the cool wind of sunset. It was as if she had lived in a house with closed shutters and had opened a door upon a garden where dreams were flowering in their glory, for she had walked out into the light and had seen my father waiting for her. Her body joined my father's in their tomb at Abitva. Beside her, as she had wished, was placed a painted wooden chest, which long ago Nea had made for her. In it she had kept the presents we had given to her and to our father when we were children. Little slips of ivory on which I had written her name while I still found it difficult to scribe. Pieces of broken limestone on which Nea had practiced carving, and 2 ivory game pieces of a set he had started to make for her and never finished. In her sarcophagus she still wore the bracelet I had given her when I was 9, and with her were put many other things that she had been fond of. A little statuette of Shemba, my father's lioness, and some painted pottery which we had brought home from Minoas when we stayed with Kiodas. When the tomb of the great Atet was opened, the flowers I had put there when I was a little girl, like soft brown shadows, still held their petals shape. Before my mother joined her husband, the room was filled with fresh garlands, as for a bridal, and their bodies slept beside each other, even as their spirits rejoiced together. I read this to her many times during the 40 days she was in the nursing home, in a room overlooking Vincent Square. It was a room of many flowers to remind her of her gardens. When I could not find what I wanted for her in shops or Covent Garden, I drove to Hurtwood very early in the morning. I'm not a healer, but prayer made a virtue flow through my hands, which seemed to keep pain at bay even better than heroin could do. I was with her all day and only went back to Beaufort Street to sleep, deep, dreamless sleep into which I plunged to replenish the energies I needed for her. I was alone there most of the time, for I considered it bad for Gillian to see me when I was unhappy. So I sent her to Seacourt with Vera. Leslie, on A.D.'s order, was at Muckerach, but twice came down to see me for a weekend. "When is the book coming? I want to see it," said Daisy. The nurse and the doctors thought she would live another week, perhaps even another month, but during the afternoon of the 7th of October I knew that she had only another night and a day to endure. I asked Leslie to postpone his return to Scotland, but he said it would annoy A.D., who wanted assistance with his income tax return. I rang up Arthur and implored him to get an advance copy of the book, which he did by having the first one taken from the binding machine and put it on the night train. At 4 a.m. I was at Covent Garden, where I found armfuls of talisman roses. There were roses at the right hand and at the left hand and at the foot of her bed, when Daisy opened her eyes to smile at me and say, "Never before has there been such a fanfare of roses." She slept through the day while I held her hand and prayed until the sweat dripped from my forehead, that whatever virtue I might have gained through all I had ever loved should last until she no longer had need of it. Already dressed in deepest black, Alfie and the other relatives waited in the next room, for I was determined that no one should be allowed near Daisy who would try to hold her down with the weight of their sorrow. At sunset she woke and asked me if the book was ready for her to see it. It had been on the floor beside me since Arthur, who had met the train, brought it to the nursing home. I gave it into her hands, and she told me to prop her up and put on her glasses. In a clear voice, she read aloud what I had written under her initials. To Daisy, from her daughter Joan, and from Sikita to her mother. With love that is more enduring than the stars. Then she said, "Thank you, my darling. That's all I was waiting for." She slept for a while. Then I saw a man standing beside the bed. For a moment I did not recognize him, for he wore khaki, and I'd never seen Bunny. Daisy rose up to greet him. A young Daisy. Hand in hand they stood smiling down at me, and I knew him, for they had become as they used to be. And I saw them walk together into the garden he had made for her before I was born to them as Sikita. Then I was alone beside a bed on which her body was still laboriously breathing. I knew she would never return to it, so I left the nurse to count the fading pulse among the mourners. Her heart went on beating for another 3 hours and ceased at midnight. I had already walked back to my empty house along the embankment. The Thames looked very cold and wide and dark, for I had to learn to live without Daisy on this side of the river. And that is the end, my friends. Have a lovely Sunday.